present. The assignment I have from the Stewardship Committee is to be engaging with that hashtag Imagine 2020 plus. I'm thinking ahead in time to come. Next Sunday, Reverend Barb has that assignment. And you know she and I think so differently from each other. So you're going to have an awesome message from her. And then in another week, we get to hear from you. And you think differently from the rest of us. So I found myself thinking about a Jesus story. And as often is the case, when I think about Jesus, I end up finding myself thinking about his call. Because isn't that part of what imagining what the future is about? It's about listening to his voice, but also then being captured by what he's calling us to be and to become. So as I thought about the call story, normally I go right away to Matthew and Mark's version of Jesus calling a couple of disciples as they are there standing on the seashore, casting a net into the sea. And Jesus comes and says, "Come, follow me, and I will make you fish for people," and they leave all. Well, Luke tells that same story. But Luke takes it and shapes it in a very different direction. Which one's right and which one's wrong? Which is the accurate remembrance? We leave that in God's hands. What's important for us is that each are meant to have us engage and to realize that there is a voice calling. And it's calling us to a particular way of being. So when Luke tells the story, we'll have the disciples and the crowds in a very public setting. And their disciples are doing what they do in their normal lives because they're not disciples yet. Simon and James and John are just being fishermen. And they're acting like fishermen. And at the end of the day, they're cleaning their nets and they're organizing so that they can be ready to go out one more time in the evening. And crowds are pressing in and around, and Jesus is teaching and talking. And then Jesus, rather than calling them from casting from the seashore, calls them to cast out into deep waters. Well, let's hear the story. Once, while Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, and the crowds were pressing in on him to hear the word of God, Jesus saw two boats on the shore of the lake. The fishermen had gone out of them and were cleaning their nets. And Jesus got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little way from the shore. And then Jesus sat down and continued to speak to the crowds from the boat. When he finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and cast your nets." And Simon answered him, "Master, we have worked all night long and have caught nothing. Yet if you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done this, they caught so many fish that their nets were beginning to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come out and help them. And when they came and filled their boats were beginning to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he threw himself down at Jesus' feet and said to him, "Get away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." For he and those who were with him were astounded at the catch that they had just brought in. James and John, sons of Zebedee, were with them, for they were partners with Simon. But Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be fishing for people." And when they brought their boats in, they left everything and followed. So there you have a story. Jesus is there. He's teaching. He's speaking. And the crowds are pressing in on him because sometimes people don't realize that you need to have some space. And his space has been taken away. And so Jesus does what Jesus often does as he notices something beside. He sees some boats and he gets into one of the boats and he has the fishermen pull him out just a little bit away from the shore, and he continues to speak. And when he's finished speaking, he will then make a request of those disciples to go out into deep water. But we need to be thinking a little bit about what's happening in those boats. Jesus is getting into that boat because he's observed that the fishermen have been cleaning their nets. They've been out all night long. They've been out fishing. And they've come ashore. And they're cleaning everything up. And as they clean it up, they're also organizing it so that the nets will fall where they're meant to fall when you cast them overboard. This is not a task that takes 5 minutes. This is a task that takes time. These disciples, or these fishermen, had done this hundreds, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of times. So they're able to do a task without really thinking about it. So undoubtedly, they're listening. Undoubtedly, they're hearing what this Jesus is talking about. This Jesus who's talking about the Word of God. And we don't always know how he talked to people about the Word of God or what his vision was. Well, we do know a little bit about his vision because we have it echoed throughout the verses. But we don't know what he was talking about at that particular time and place. We just know he's talking about God. And then suddenly he looks at this disciple, this fisherman, and says to him, "Go on out to deep water. Go on out. And let those beautiful nets down that you've just so nicely cleaned and organized." And you can hear it in Peter's voice. "Master, I've worked all night long. And what's worse is I've caught nothing." And unspoken is, and you've just seen me organizing all this stuff right now. Unspoken is that thought that undoubtedly is going through his head. I'm tired. I've got to go out tonight again. I need to go home and get some rest. I'm ready to go home. I'm finished organizing my nets. I'm finished cleaning my nets. And here you are, a stranger in this community, and you want me to cast one more time? You know I'm a night fisherman, don't you? And you know it's broad daylight. And you're asking me to take night equipment and cast it say any of those things? And yet, I'd be shocked if he wasn't thinking them. Master, I've worked all night long. But if you say so. Because at this point, Jesus is a guest on his boat. At this point, it's about hospitality. At this point, a guest on your boat, whether he knows anything or not about fishing, has just made a request. And what do you do for your guests? I know you're good people. You try to please your guests. You try to do what's right for your guests. Because it's what's right. So he sets out for deep water. And one of the things to think about, fish aren't known for their brains. But they're also survivors. In daylight, you can see a net, or some kinds of net. And that's why night fishermen aren't successful in daylight, because the fish can see the nets and stay away. So it doesn't make sense to let down night nets in daylight. But the guest has asked, and those nets are let down. And lo and behold, a catch beyond catch. So much of a catch that those nets are breaking. So much of a catch that independent guys, and if you're a guy, you're probably independent. You're probably also married to an independent woman, or in partnership with someone else who's independent in thinking. They have to signal their partners to come and help them. And the boats are beginning to sink. Only then do we see a change happen in Simon, which is why the text will start calling him Simon Peter. Change happens. Change happens that master becomes Lord. Change happens. The nets were let down. One more time. Exhausted. One more time. And something happens. Well, at this point, it stops being about fish. Because at this point they go ashore and they abandon everything and start following Jesus. Now, let's not go literal on this. If this were a real life situation, those fish went to market. But that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is they've been captured. They've been captured by the imagination of a person who asked them to try one more time. They've been captured by an individual who says, put that net over the side one more time. Do something after you've done it all night long and are exhausted, and all you want to do is to go home, rest, and renew yourself so that you're ready maybe at night. But in the middle of that exhaustion comes the challenge. Try it. But don't do it the same way. Do something that you're not prepared for. Do something that you think is a little bit crazy. Do something that's a little bit out of the box. Do something simply because you're being asked to do it. If you were here last Sunday, that's one of the things that Cindy was talking about in her storytelling with us, was encouraging us as a congregation to think about stepping into that time and place where we try something that is beyond our imagination, that doesn't necessarily we think it will work properly, but we just try because we're called to try. It's part of what Jesus is calling us to do. And I would like to think, as this church is stepping into 2020, that you're imagining Part of your imagination is stepping into the realm of who the next senior pastor will be. Because we know while that's not likely to change in January, it's going to happen fairly early in the year that you're going to see a transition take place. You're going to see a new person coming who will be asking you, inviting you to go out into those deep waters. Who will be encouraging you to cast your net. To do something that doesn't make sense. To try again. To try one more time. With enthusiasm. With energy. Simply because he, she, they are asking. So that's one message I want you to carry out of this, to think about. Because we are encouraging you to cast your net for 2020. But we're also asking you to do it differently, to imagine that someone new is in the boat with you. Someone who's going to lead you in some unusual, strange places, and some pretty normal places too. Don't get me wrong on this, because you don't have a crazy search committee. They're rather salt of the earth, and they represent you nicely. But you're going to be asked. But the other part that I want you to just briefly think about is your own personal life. Because life can be challenging. We often are exhausted. We're tired. We put in a long day of work and it's not felt successful. We've gotten organized and suddenly in the midst of all of that, we're asked to let it all go because someone else has a need. One more time. And we need to embrace it with enthusiasm simply because we've been asked. Well, those disciples, when they get ashore, they follow Jesus on the way. It's a journey. It's a process. And maybe the way to end this message is simply to enter into a communion song that's all about journey. So I invite you to lead us in singing our communion song. Barbara, will you lead us in singing our communion song?